housekeeping item before we get into the content. You can ask a question on this Google Meet. There's a Q&A tool that you can click by clicking the 6 dots on the bottom right hand of your screen. We're going to get to questions at the end, but feel free to use the time to ask anything top of mind, and we'll get to as many questions at the end of the session. I know we're all eager to get started on this very important and trending topic, so I'll hand it over to my colleague Bernadette to kick us off. Over to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Adam. Hi, everyone. Bernadette Carson, API Integration Customer Engineer here at Google Cloud. And let's kind of kick things off by jumping into the first section, which really we're kind of going to talk about what we're seeing in the market today. Right. And so when I think about just agentic technology and really the capabilities that it can unlock, right, we're starting to really see firsthand that this technology has the ability to be able to change the world we live in. Right. And I think we're all going to experience that change a little differently, right? There's going to be different ways in which we're impacted, but I think there's one key theme that's going to stay the same, and that is that there's going to be an impact, right? And one airline company really thought through that potential impact, right? We've all been on planes before, most likely, all tried to book flights before, maybe have been caught up with trying to use credits and different vouchers, and really this airline company realized there's an opportunity here. And it took a little bit of pressure for them to realize this, right? There was a surge in travel post-pandemic, and that surge also caused an increase in their customer service representatives and the amount of calls that they're getting. So they decided, let's use agents to maybe help make this process easier. Before that, you know, an agent you'd call in if you had the requests to book flights and combine it with promotions. And this would be just a lengthy process, right? You're waiting in line for the person that has the same exact question ahead of you to finish out. And so what the agent this airline deployed did is they turned that into a seamless self-service experience, right? So through a chat experience, they're able to find my customer profile that has my credits, right? Verify the terms of the voucher, search for available flights. They're being able to meet specific criteria that's important to me and help me out faster. Right. And so that shows us two key impacts, right? An improved customer experience, but also the customer service representatives feeling liberated and able to focus on the most complex scenarios because now their call volumes were lower. And we can kind of see this change of day-to-day lives of people throughout different industries, right? Because of agents. Some examples can be, you know, grocery shopping, and maybe you have an example of you need to be able to bake a cake, right? There's a couple different steps in that. You probably need a recipe, you need to be able to go to the store and get the ingredients. And even if you're using an app, that can take some time. And so a grocery store chain decided, let's use agents to help out with that. Tell this agent that you want to bake a cake, it's going to pull up a recipe for you, and it's going to add those items into your cart. Researchers have also seen impacts, whether it be through using agents to be able to create tests, you know, build a hypothesis, analyze those results, and able to do that autonomously now while those researchers are sleeping, right? And really, we're going to see kind of this technology continue to evolve. We're experiencing that already, but we also need to consider the risks with that, right? So we want to be able to achieve these amazing outcomes, but we need to make sure that we're considering the challenges and the risks as it relates to that. So that's where I'm going to hand it over to Lena, who's going to walk you through some of those risks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Bernadette. My name is Lena Chipman. My pronouns are they and she, and I'm the Managing Director of Technology Transformation at Concentrix. So let me talk to you about the sorts of things that we have seen in the market, right? Challenges that we've observed that could potentially impact you from getting to those ideal futures, right? And that return on investment you're looking for. One of the biggest ones that we encounter is the concept of ungoverned AI, right? You've probably got this going on to some extent in your companies today. People have a cool idea. They've heard about something in the news. They've heard of some neat concept they want to try out with AI. And then they start creating these projects, right? And these projects don't necessarily have any limitations on them. They don't have any bounds on them. They don't have governance on them. And the consequence is that now there's a risk of that AI going rogue, right? Specifically that generative AI going rogue. Obviously, this is not a specific problem to generative AI systems, large language models, but other classifiers can have this problem too. You can have fabrications, you can have erroneous output. These things can have significant impacts, as Air Canada, for example, encountered about a year and a half ago when their generative AI system made promises that were outside of policy. They were then held to account by what that AI said, even though that wasn't the intention at all. You can have extremely high operating costs, you can have data leakage, and you can have unpredictable results that you can't reproduce. Why did the AI do this? Why didn't it do what we wanted it to do? There's a lot of hype out there claiming that these systems are perfect, right? But what we see practically when we look at research that's being performed in the field, we find that LLM models tend to cite incorrect sources, even when you give them accurate data for grounding. Often they will completely fabricate links or create invalid ones, right? So they'll give you a source. When you click on it, it doesn't work. Or if it is there, it's not what the thing is saying that is actually on the site. And when we look at agentic specifically, we find that with failure rates of over 50%, you are spending $2.50 per task performed. So if the agent's not doing what you want it to do, and you're not governing it properly to keep it doing the things you want and not the things you don't, there's a significant cost involved with this, right? And that's going to obviously negatively impact ROI, certainly is going to impact your time to value. This situation gets worse when we start thinking about agentic AI, right? So if I have a standard large language model and I'm using it as a chatbot, and it doesn't operate autonomously, right? There's no human in the loop. It's not acting with intention. It's just responding to prompts, right? It's not utilizing external tools. It's not adapting to feedback. You know, that AI, right, that non-agentic AI has a relatively lower set of risks than an AI that is agentic and can go do things, right? The moment that you give the power to a non-deterministic system to go do something, you have an additional set of risks that arise, right? Costs become uncontrollable because you don't know what it's going to do. It might take one step to execute the task. It might take 100. It might call 50 tools when only one would have sufficed. The security constraints may not be honored by the model at all, right? How do you make sure that the model's accessing data that it's supposed to access and that it has been given consent by a human to access, right? If I'm interacting with your agentic AI and I'm in the financial services business, I'm have an account with your bank and your agent starts pulling money out of one account and moving it to another, I would probably be pretty unhappy about that as a customer, right? I didn't grant it the consent to do that, but it was doing it nonetheless. So how do you enforce those constraints against it? It gets really challenging sometimes then to prove a clear path to business value because the ungoverned agentic AI is so unpredictable in its behavior. And it's important to note that despite all the great advances that have been made in these technologies, they still have significant weaknesses. So recently, the Claude 3.7 model was tested by Anthropic. They've been having it play the video game Pokemon, the original Pokemon. So if you're familiar with that game, you have a small character that you move around, and then you collect monsters, right? And then there's a story that you're trying to progress through. And that story has a number of different milestones inside of it. It's broken down. It's about 55 milestones that exist in that story. To get just 11 of those milestones in on the best run took 35,000 iterations of Claude 3.7 at a cost of about $2.50 a pop. That's a lot of money to get something done that a human child can do fairly easily for fun, right? So we need to be aware of the limitations of these systems and make sure that we're governing them correctly and not just thinking, oh, this is a cool project, this is a great use case that we think might be a great use case. It sounds cool, let's do it, right? Because when you do that, we have found that these are not ways to quickly develop business value. In fact, they're ways to generate unnecessary cost and risk. The additional challenges that we've seen and that we've heard from our customers relate to things like agentic model safety, right? How do I keep that agent from choosing an action that isn't desirable, right? Taking the 100 steps to complete the task when it could have just done one, right? It could have called one API. How do I keep them from digressing on the topics we don't want, which in a broader sense is saying, how do we keep the agent from choosing to do things that are not within the constrained set of actions that we're expecting it to do? Again, they're non-deterministic, right? So you have to have some way to control that. If you think about this from a purely technological perspective, You've probably heard about A2A, right? Agent-to-agent protocol. You've probably heard about MCP, the tool using protocol. There are lots of questions about, what do I expose through MCP? Do I give my agents all of my APIs? Do I have one MCP server per agent? That seems like that'd be pretty costly, right? So that's a question we often hear, is how do you address that? Securing A2A is itself a challenge. When do I allow agents to talk to other agents? Why do I let them talk to other agents? How do I make sure that when MCP and A2A are employed, that again, we're honoring the consent of the humans involved, right? That the agent isn't just doing things autonomously that we didn't intend. From a product management perspective, determining what makes good use cases for agents that generate business value is a challenge, right? Obviously, of course, we have a perspective on that, and I'll get to that here in a few minutes, but it's important that we are definitely looking at this in terms of how can we pick a use case that builds value as opposed to a use case that just seems really kind of neat. And that comes with analysis, also trade-offs, right? Sometimes when we have human agentics in play, a person going and do something versus a generative AI one, there's a cost to both tools. Generative AI can be very expensive. And so there's a question ultimately that when would I use agentic as opposed to some other tool? And then let's say we could test all of these things and we've got something ready to roll into production. How do we make sure that we are deploying that in a way that is safe, that we have the observability, we have the desired performance, we know that the agent isn't going to go do unpredictable things we don't want it to do, and that we're doing this in alignment with all of our DevSecOps policies, rather than our information security policies, so that when we're putting things out there that are building value, we're managing the risks in an appropriate fashion. So I wouldn't bring up all these challenges to you if I didn't have some solutions to offer, right? Because the promise of agentics is realizable, but only if you're going to put proper frameworks in place to be able to manage them correctly, select the right use cases for them, and be able to execute upon them in a reasonable, sensible fashion. So we have a number of AI frameworks that we have seen that have been very effective to achieve that with our customers. And irrespective of where you're going to need to have some sort of solution to these challenging problems. And let me offer some solutions that you might want to consider. The biggest principle we like to consider when we think about how do you govern agentics, the same one that we looked at when we were thinking about how do you govern software products, how do you govern APIs. The concept is productization, right? Think of the agentic tool that you're building, not as a piece of software that you're constructing, but rather a product, a digital product that is providing a business capability. That allows you to provide all of your product governance processes with some adjustments to account for the differences between agentics and other types of products. It allows you to apply all of those product governance principles that you already have a practice for to these agentic systems. And so by using AI to power those new capabilities, you can employ the same governance techniques that work for you today, just again with a different spin on them to account for the technological difference. The productization, product governance will set you free. Let's talk about that in a practical sense, right? And so one question that arises, of course, when we're looking at products is, what makes for a good product? Why do we specify on a specific product, right? What makes a product a good one versus a bad one? This really is getting at the use case question. And so how we like to look at this is we like to look at the world, particularly in the case of agentics, right? In terms of the concept of an agentic ideal task, right? Agentic AI, we have found, works best when you are augmenting humans, not replacing them. And you're doing that by you're letting the human offload a task that they can quickly verify, but they don't like to do and generally aren't very good at doing. And so the way you can metric this is you can look at multiple axes, right? You can say, I'm looking at tasks that are very boring for a human to perform. They're very difficult for a human to create the output. And that difficult, can mean, it takes a lot of effort mentally to do it, requires a highly skilled research, but it can also mean the circumstances in which a human is doing it is very difficult. For example, it's extremely time constrained, or it requires splitting their cognitive load. Note-taking is a good example of that. Note-taking doesn't seem especially difficult, but if you've ever led a meeting and we're trying to take notes in that meeting, you can kind of split your attention in a way that makes you less effective at both, ultimately. The time required to create the output is another really important one, right? Things that take a really long time for humans to do generally are going to be things that humans don't particularly like to do and become more error prone. But perhaps the most important axis, and the one that I really need to heavily emphasize and why this is bold here, is the speed and ease of accurate output verification, right? Task for the output requires as long to verify as it does to actually create, are not really good use cases for agentics. Why? Because generative AI systems are non-deterministic. They're unpredictable. They produce errors that are unpredictable. And so if I have to go back and do the thing that it did myself to verify the output, then I haven't really saved any time or effort, right? Which means that my ROI for that task will not be good. So in this classification framework, we can therefore then break use cases up into 3 different possibilities, right? The agentic ideal task is the sort of task that's going to realize high ROI. They're going to have high impact for you. So they're going to be the ones you want to focus on. These tasks are difficult, time-consuming, and boring to perform, but for which accurate output verification is easy and fast. A very classic example of this is one that we're benefiting from right here on this call, which is note-taking, right? Note-taking is difficult to do if you're running the call. If I were having to take notes on this call while I'm also trying to talk to you on this call, I would not be providing the best notes or the best experience in terms of narrative, right? It's time-consuming to take notes, right? I may have all these notes. I have to boil them down afterwards. That's time-consuming. I don't particularly like doing it, and it's boring. I've never met a human who really enjoyed taking notes and boiling them down into bullets afterwards. But verification of that is quick and easy to do in an accurate way, because if I'm in the meeting, I can easily look at the notes generated for the meeting. And I can easily say, oh yes, these are correct. This was missing. Here's something that doesn't sound quite right. It takes me very little time to verify that output. And so note-taking, well, a very contrived and simple example, is a good example of an agentic ideal task. And that it produces higher ROI when the human can offload it. Naturally, again, note-taking is a pretty simple example of something that falls into this category. But we can think of other examples of this, and we'll hit on one practical example a little bit later. As we move further to the left on these axes, we start moving into what we call the agentic potential tasks, right? Again, we want to hold that fast and easy to accurately validate output criterion, but we're going to relax the other ones, right? It may be something that is easy to do, but bores humans to death and is very time-consuming to perform, right? Or alternatively, is something that humans find really interesting but takes forever to do and is really challenging for them to do. Agentic potential tasks might generate some positive ROI, but it's important to note that as these other factors reduce, the ROI benefit goes down as well. So you need to be very mindful about these potential tasks. So look at the trade-offs of them, right? Agentics may be a technically viable solution, but not a solution that's going to generate the value that you need. And in some cases, there are going to be ones where the cost is going to be higher for the agentic approach than it would have been just to have the human do it. If we lose our ease and speed of accurate output validation, or if any of these axes are extremely low, then our task is non-agentic, right? There is a better solution for the problem. So the agentic approach then becomes non-technically viable, right? And there are lots of examples of where this becomes a problem, but legal research is one that you may have heard of out in the field, right? It's something you may have heard of, you may have read about, that when generative AI is used to perform research in legal cases, for example, it tends to fabricate and create case law that does not exist. It tends to improperly cite what it finds, and it tends to misinterpret the things that it actually does locate. So when it produces the brief, you then have to have someone go and reread the brief and redo all the research. Well, if I'm already having to do all of that work in the first place, what benefit did I get from using the agentic system? Right? I didn't gain anything from it because I had to redo all of the work to verify it. So that's a great example of a task that's non-agentic, right? It's something where a human should be involved with it. The computer is going to produce no or even negative value. It's going to cost you money to use it. So this allows us to classify, and allows you now to classify your use cases into one of these forms to be able to begin the process of prioritizing them and identifying what makes sense to take into production to build that ROI and what does not. There are other product governance tools you can employ to make sure that your agentic AI solutions, if they're even the right solutions to use, are going to be, properly governed. A lot of these are the same ones you've seen if you've been doing API productization, for example. These are the same techniques that you're going to employ there, right? Just with an agentic spin to them. So agentic transparency is a KPI management. We need to look at trends in agent behavior, not just performance, right? Did the agent respond fast enough? Apparently that's important, but we want to make sure that when the agent is, say, a retention agent and is trying to keep people using a service, which is a task that is difficult, time-consuming, it's boring, so humans don't like doing it. It's easy and quick to verify the output because you can look at what was offered and did the user decide to stay on the service. So it's quick and easy to verify the accuracy of the output. You want to make sure that you are doing that and that you're tracking that. So you're not seeing 100% retention because your agent is giving everyone 100% discount on their service every month, right? That would get 100% retention, but it's also bad for your business, right? So the agentic transparency concept is taking the concept of operational transparency that we've already been doing in software product management for years and applying it into the agentic space. Agentic risk oversight is another tool that we can employ. So if we think about the space of agentic ideal tasks, we can think of some of these where the risk is higher than others. If my agentic ideal task is dealing with healthcare information, it's dealing with PII, it's dealing with PAN, right, so credit card information, a high impact of error is guaranteed. If the thing makes a mistake in healthcare and provides bad advice, if it provides incorrect information, if it feeds data to people who aren't supposed to have it, there is significant legal liability that exists. So the high impact of error there means that we need to employ significant technique to provide that oversight for risk. Assuming the agentic task is appropriate at all, we might say the risk of error is far too high. This might be an agentic ideal task, but the risk of error is so high that it is not worth going down that road. But there's also a flip side to this too, which is a positive one, which is to say that if the task has a low risk of error, why are we putting significant effort into automated reviews and multi-human reviews? If the risk is really low, what's the point, right? Let's not spend more time on risk oversight for an agentic system that doesn't really need it. We can also look at prioritization. So prioritization of products is something that every product organization needs to do. We can do the same thing within the agentic ideal tasks as well, right? We can look at them and say, okay, well, we have a space of agentic ideal tasks. Which ones are going to provide the highest level of human augmentation and therefore the best return on investment? So these are ones where we look at, is there a task that where the agent could do something that is impossible for a human, right? That it has the ability to access infinite computational capacity, right? Infinite unlimited memory. And those are the sorts of things where the agentic ideal task is great. Here's a practical example of this that you might have seen before. A certain company out there now has an AI playlist generator that allows you to generate playlists for music using generative AI tooling. This is great, and it benefits really well from the sorts of unlimited memory that a computer has. You may have an encyclopedic knowledge of music. I myself have an encyclopedic knowledge of 90s new wave. But it's not what a computer can have to be able to draw connections between bands you've never even heard of before. And so this is something where that is a place where that task is especially well suited for agentics because specifically it can benefit from that unlimited memory. And then another product governance tool that's excellent is the concept of the domain-driven agentic tool. So when we're thinking about what tools these agents should use, we want to make sure that we're not giving them everything, right? Because when you give a system that is agentic everything, you're not really going to be able to predict what it uses versus what it doesn't, right? So we want to restrain that. And for security reasons, we want to practice least privilege. We want to give the thing as few tools as possible to limit the blast radius in the event of a mistake or if the agent is given too much authority, right? So we want to prevent the old sorcerer's apprentice problem, where the agent goes and does things that you don't want it to do. So really looking at the domain of that agentic system, where does it live organizationally? What is it supposed to access? And performing that analysis really helps drive what we give it access to with things like MCP and A2A. I noticed a hand come up. I'd say please add your questions to the QA and we'll go ahead and answer them at the end. Thanks. So when we put all this together, we can think about a cycle of effective AI governance, right? Where we're using all of these tools together to effectively govern the AI systems, specifically the agentic systems that we're looking at. And so this starts, as with every product, with the definition of the problem. And we do this by defining a business capability and the problem we're solving. And then we're going to look at it and we're going to say, is this agentic ideal? Is it agentic potential? Or is it non-agentic? And if it's non-agentic, let's not try to use AI to solve that problem, right? Because we don't want to go down an approach of measuring trade-offs and trying to manage a product when the technology isn't even the correct technology to use. When we do the implementation, we want to make sure we're doing it with protections, right? There are several protections that we want to offer. Obviously prompt guardrails, exposing things through APIs, so that means using things like MCP, for example. These are all very important, but we're also talking about the broader product protection space, such as that agentic risk oversight we're talking about. We want to monitor and analyze it, not just to look at are we generating the expected value, but to look at those other kind of key KPIs, right? Are we seeing good output that's effective? Are we seeing a lot of fabrications, and the fabrications are reducing the value? And then we want to review and iterate, right? Identify issues based on what we found through that agentic observability, and then make changes to the product using our product governance process as appropriate. So now that we've talked about all the different approaches for governance and sorts of things, excuse me, the sorts of things that you might do to ensure that your agentic AI is the right problem and that's being governed properly, let's talk a little bit about how you'd actually go build that. And let's bring this to a practical example. One thing I want to point out is that the nature of this particular webinar is that this is going to be a very high-level overview of this sort of solution architecture approach, right? So we're going to talk at a very, very high level about these things, right? We're going to talk more about a use case and some of the practical realizations of it. On September 3rd, we have an excellent webinar that's about architecture and execution. So please invite your developers and practitioners to that if you're really interested in those live details and really that detailed architecture. The QR code on the screen gives you a way to actually get into that webinar and register for it. So if you want that really deep architectural dive, this is the webinar you want to go to. Here we're just going to stay at a very high level. So much as I love to get into the weeds, we're really trying to keep it at a high level about ROI here today. So at a really high level, when we think about architectural considerations, right, the exact tooling you want to use is going to depend on the specific use case and really the level of determinism you need in that output, right? So again, high risk of error things naturally will require a high level of determinism so you can tell where the errors are, right? So it's important to keep that in mind. So here's a very high level conceptual model, for example, where we have users are accessing API products that are powered through agentic AI. Apigee, your API management platform, is going to invoke the model, which is built on Gemini. Gemini is going to use tools that are exposed through Apigee, which is acting as an MCP server. Apigee invokes the APIs. The APIs access the data stores. The important thing to note is that the data stores are not directly accessed by the model, right? The model is going through tools, and in that way, security and governance can be maintained through the approaches you currently have today for API management and API governance. An alternative approach involves the API accessing the model directly, and so that becomes an API using the model for a specific use case, such as text summarization, so turn JSON into text, for example. Very valuable, but again, note that the model has no direct connection to the data store. It's always operating through a tool. Alternative approaches to this can involve using things like AgentSpace that can sit in front and provide more of a chatbot style interface than, say, an API-based interface. So let's take this concept to a practical example. So to see the sort of ways that you approach this for particular use cases. So a practical application that's very near and dear to Concentrix, right, is the concept of augmented L1 support. So if you've ever been in an operations environment, right, you have a set of agents that are human agents that are trying to solve people's problems, right? And that level 1 support can sometimes be the most challenging one because you have a wide range of sentiments. There's some people who are very, very, very unhappy. Some people who are happy, but maybe we have some problems. They're going to be a little delicate about it. And the consequence of just the nature of that business is that you have a high churn rate. And so you tend to have high training costs and a wide variability in skills. As an operations manager, right, this is going to increase your costs. And in order to make sure that the support is being provided properly, you're going to have to do call reviews. Nobody likes doing call reviews. If you've ever worked in a call center or worked adjacent to a call center, this is the least fun thing that anyone has to do, which is listen to a call, take notes about what was said on the call, and compare it to policy to determine where there were mistakes versus not. And then provide feedback. This is a very time-consuming, difficult, and boring task, right? And in general, the output is quick and easy to verify because we can determine was the proper policy followed or not, right? Was the customer happy or not, right? So the net promoter score measure. So as an operations manager, wouldn't it be great if my least skilled, newest agents were as talented as my best agents? Did I get the same performance out of them? And so our use case here, right, is using AI to provide just-in-time coaching and notes writing. This is an agentic ideal task, right? As I mentioned, right, the humans already know the process to follow. The L1 agents are trained on what they're supposed to do. They're on the call, so they can quickly verify if the agent's just-in-time coaching is accurate, because it'll jog the memory to say, oh, yes, I should have taken this troubleshooting path. And the notes taking is automatic as well, and the human can quickly verify for reasons we've already talked about. The agentic AI also benefits from its infinite capacity to look up information via a tool. So even if the human may be familiar with the process, it's quite likely they forgot it. The agentic AI never forgets anything because it can access an MCP tool to go retrieve that knowledge base. So at a very high level, the solution architecture involves augmenting the current call center tooling that they have, their current call center workspace. And we augment it using Google AgentSpace. And AgentSpace is going to invoke agentic AIs that employ Gemini using the ADK to be able to provide that note-taking capability, which is a native functionality within Gemini, but also to retrieve that enterprise data, we're going to need tools. And so we implement those tools using microservices on GKE or integrations with Appent. And then we use Apigee API management to expose them as MCP tools to the agentic AI. So it can make use of those tools. And so it can follow that process, getting access to that enterprise data, those sensitive policies and procedures, to provide that real-time guidance, because the agentic AI is listening to the call through the use of AgentSpace. So this is a really simple use case, right? But we can drive scalable value off of this, right? Our augmented support agent is going to reduce our cost, right? And it's going to improve our customer experience. Process recall is improved, note writing is improved, thus reducing long-term costs, and additional callbacks, right? Because the process is correct. Ideally, we don't have a person calling back a second time about the same problem. On-hold dead air time is reduced, errors are reduced, release time is reduced. We can improve this and build even greater value by looking at additional use cases. For example, let's take this agent and extend it to the end user, so that with the consent, the end user can monitor and adjust their services. We can augment our L2 agent by having the agent be able to look at autonomously all of the notes on all the L2 calls and look at peer solutions and customer notes to suggest new and innovative approaches, right? Even if a fabrication occurs, that's a happy accident, right? That's beneficial. That's augmenting the human's creativity. So the key point to note is that you drive scalable value of these tools, not by replacing people, but by augmenting them. right? You're going to give them assistance that make them more effective at the task that they can do, and then again, make them better, faster, more creative, and ultimately happier. And that's going to drive that scalable ROI. To talk more about what that looks like, I'm going to hand it back over to Bernadette.
Thank you, Lena. And so as we kind of move towards that scalable value that Lena was just mentioning, being able to quantify that value is going to be key. And so what we can kind of see here, just kind of throughout the conversation over the last 30 minutes, is that innovation's increasing, there's excitement growing around the technology. But we also have to consider the fact that IT leaders don't all of a sudden have unlimited budgets or even larger budgets than last year to be able to fund these initiatives in the current economic climate. So with that in mind, we looked at research conducted by Menlo Ventures last year in 2024. But really what this made clear is that when it comes to use case selection, quantifiable ROI is important. It's the top selection criteria, which shows us that companies are prioritizing that tangible business value, right? So we want to be able to innovate, but we want to make sure it's tied back to tangible value. So asking questions like, how is this going to generate revenue? We're reducing costs and improving efficiency, but is that measurable, right? How are we measuring that? And this emphasis on ROI is really reflecting a maturing market. Back when it was just early adopters, that was really just driven by curiosity and this desire to experiment. And now we're kind of refocusing, right? And that focus is now kind of narrowing in on strategic impact. Right? So the task for us has shifted a bit when we're need to go beyond technical specifications and beyond that art of possible. And it's our responsibility to help you demonstrate that link between technology and business outcomes. And a really great example of this is Honeywell, right? It's a great example of how proper use case identification can really lead to ROI. For them, what started as a multi-month auditing exercise for their operations really transformed into the adoption of AI solutions that are now projecting an estimated $200 million in incremental business value. And we kind of all know, a little bit about Honeywell and what they do for a business, right? Industrial giant manufacturing. They build products, they design those products, they have them manufactured, and in some cases, it can be for pretty complex systems. And so this kind of brought us to this pain point around knowledge fragmentation, right? And critical information that they need is related to design and building products is scattered across different systems. So, for example, an engineer may need to find a new supplier for a key component, right? And because that supplier that they were currently using went out of business, this brings up the manual task of finding that new supplier. Maybe they would log into different systems, find relevant information. They would then need to cross-reference that information about the part to make sure that it's meeting benchmarks that they have from a performance standpoint, compliance requirements, right? And then they have to summarize all of that information and compile it into a formal change order request, right? So that process in itself may take days to weeks, and ultimately it's causing a delay in some sort of project, right? And so what we can see is that we can have this assistant to the engineers, right? We can use agents. Engineers can now use agents to be able to tackle that same issue. So when we're thinking about that, finding a new part supplier, we can now just say, hey, help me find and validate a replacement for XYZ component in specific product A, right? And give me a priority for North American suppliers and ensuring FAA compliance. And once you do all of that, draft a change order request with the findings. And so that agent then at that point can move forward, execute this task autonomously, reaches across those various systems that, remember, that knowledge fragmentation was kind of the key pain point of their issues, understand the preferences, ensure compliance regulations, performance markers, also retrieve information about pricing and availability, which I did not even mention, right? And alternatives, and really kind of synthesizes all of this information to find the optimal replacement. And it doesn't just stop there, right? That agent can then begin the process of drafting that change order request. So when we take a look at that and everything that Honeywell has been able to do, we can see that hours of work can really be simplified into a conversation with an agent now. And so engineers can now deliver results up to 70% faster. So when we're talking about the return on investment of that, we're seeing that, yes, there's time acceleration, right? Time acceleration to be able to design new products, provide updates to those products, right? Overall, just increase the rate of innovation. And also in this use case, we're reducing the risk of human error, especially as it relates to compliance, right? Missing those compliance requirements and something like finding a new part from a supplier would be really costly. And that agent's going to ensure that you're not going to make the costly mistake. That Honeywell story is a really great example of shifting from just simple task automation to now autonomous goal-oriented orchestration. And really that shift enables the benefit, right? The benefits of AI to be demonstrated through increased autonomy, proactive delivery, and the creation of new capabilities, right? We're doing proactive problem solving in certain cases. And if we focus in on some of those benefits, I think productivity is one that we always kind of defer to when we think about AI and agentic use cases, right? How can you, particularly in an IT process and in staff roles, drive significant productivity improvements, right? That is one benefit that I think our mind always goes to with AI. And as we accelerate and automate tasks, I think it's important to remember that with the productivity, are we also ensuring that it's secure? Right? So productivity and the value that we're gaining there is really only valuable if we're protecting it at the same time, which kind of leads us into our next pillar here of security, right? And security relates right back to that Honeywell story when I said there's risk mitigation, right? Being able to reduce human error, ensure that compliance regulations were followed. It can also help and just enhance your security posture through improved threat identification, maybe reduce some response times. And the nice thing about security is that it's almost invisible, right? And that leads us to user experience, right? Our protected systems need to also deliver a great user experience. And we saw that through the conversation that I brought up in the beginning, where the airline and that new capability where there was a chat interface to kind of help out with the customer support. And we can see that that directly impacts satisfaction, right? And making people happier is also a direct path to customer loyalty, retention, advocacy, right? And ultimately, that user experience can directly align to business growth. And when we say business growth, that business growth may be lead generation, right? That benefit could also be customer acquisition, but ultimately what we're driving towards is revenue. Those business benefits have a direct link to tangible results. So what researchers at Google Cloud did is they sent out over 2,500 different surveys to different business leaders, right? That's going to be across different industries and regions. What they were able to capture was that 74% are already seeing ROI on at least one Gen AI use case. And of those use cases that are in production, 86% are seeing revenue growth, right? Again, tangible business results based off of those benefits of AI. And again, there's kind of this focus in the market around productivity and increased efficiency, but it's important to remember that you're able to unlock innovation, new revenue streams, and also improve those customer experiences at the same time. And when we think about what drives us to this value, and really what we need to consider when we're on that path along the way are to be agile, right? Let's take an agile approach to this. Let's identify and target those high impact use cases, just like Lena walked us through. And let's be context aware, right? industry trends and regional trends will make an impact, right? So we need to consider all of these things when we're driving towards that value. And we do have programs to assist in this kind of journey to value realization, just like the agentic readiness engagement. So Lena, I'll pass it over to you so you can speak about that.
Yeah, thank you. So let's talk about agentic readiness, right? So you're going to need to evaluate your agentic readiness, no matter who you are, if you're going to go down this road. So this is something that you're going to need to do. And indeed, you're going to need a broader agentic program to be effective in this particular path, right? You can't look at this in terms of, I'm just going to create one agent. I'm going to create 10 agents. So the question that's mentioned in the chat is, how do you achieve reusability? Well, if you don't have a program to manage agentics, you'll have sprawl. And as we saw with APIs, as we saw with SOA, as we saw with pretty much any software product in the enterprise, if you don't have some kind of governance and some kind of program to make this effective, you will have sprawl, right? You will have people reinventing the wheel constantly. So Concentrix, our agentic program starts with agentic readiness, right? Where we're going to set a foundation and a roadmap, and then we're going to go into specific programmatic elements, right? As we walk the path with you, to include things like observability, which we've talked about before, but even things like workforce readiness to make sure that people are prepared to interact with these things and know how to go about doing it in an effective way, and coming up with good use cases and providing good feedback so that you can achieve those optimized human plus AI workflows, right? Augmenting the humans, not replacing them. So our agentic readiness offering at Concentrix is a 12-week engagement, right? And this is a quick start engagement that's going to evaluate your organization's alignment, your CX alignment, your operations, your available data, security and policy, privacy standards, and even your technological capabilities to ultimately produce a view of where you are right now, where you want to go organizationally, and what are the steps to get there, including the next best steps to take, right? Which include things like a technology blueprint. It includes use case identification. It includes a path to value. The idea being that you can't get here from here unless you can start demonstrating value here, right? So we want to make sure that you're showing that value very quickly. And that's what agentic readiness is all about, is making sure that you can go down this road, identify the steps to go down that road, and identify the key value milestones that are going to justify the continued investment down that road. So we have a pretty significant timeline here, and I'm not going to go through all the details because you'll get the slide deck afterwards, right? But as mentioned, it's a 12 to 13-week engagement, right? That focuses on AI platform evaluation, technical solution design, business operations readiness. You can see all of the elements about it here, but it is thorough and it is cross-functional and it is interdisciplinary. The goal being to make sure that your organization understands it's prepared to walk this road, because it isn't simply a technology problem. We've talked about the product management components of it as well, but there are a broader set of things, right? If I don't have good data, I can't build good agents, as an example. As an output of this, you're going to get an AI maturity assessment. Again, that's going to tell you where you are today. And then you're going to get a target state agentic architecture and a roadmap to get there. It's going to tell you where you are going to end up in the future, as well as a strategic and tactical roadmap that's based on productized, identified use cases. And one of the key elements that comes out of this as well is an ROI model to identify at what points down that road are you going to start realizing value, so you can make that business case from a leadership perspective to make sure that you get that buy-in from the C-level that Bernadette was just talking about on the prior slide. So we have a couple of case studies that I can go into. I'm happy to talk about them in more detail, but in the interest of time and be able to get to people's questions, I'm going to be very brief on them. But one customer we've done agentic readiness for had a significant problem where they had a number of vendors coming in and saying, we can solve your agentic problems right now. We can solve all of your business problems with agentics. They needed someone to cut through the hype. And so we came in to perform agentic readiness, and we identified gaps that they had across their enterprise disciplines that would prevent them from realizing any value with agentics at all, even if they had a great agentic ideal use case. So we also identify roadmaps for them to correct those issues, also to find good use cases that for them were agentic ideal, low risk of error, high impact, would generate a good ROI, and then be able to map that to the technologies that would make sense, to cut through all of that hype, right? And to get them to a place where they now have a clear view on how to start getting that value that's been promised by Agentic. And then for a regional airline, we're in a situation where they have an idea of what they want to do from a technological perspective, but they didn't really have any great use cases to identify where they should go, right? They had the technology, they thought it was great, they had lots of ideas, not really sure which ones are going to be impactful. So here the focus was less about all the gaps that they had and trying to cut through hype, and more about, let's think about where your capabilities exist today, what data you have that's effective, what approaches you have that works, what products you have available, what tools are available for things like MCP. And let's think about what are great use cases that are agentic ideal that will produce good ROI, either reducing costs by offloading boring tasks from humans so they can do more value-added things, or, and ideally both, increasing revenue. And so for this customer, we were able to identify over $150 million of new revenue generation potential by taking those boring, difficult, time-consuming, easy-to-verify tasks off the humans. Let the humans focus on just observing, managing, by exception, those agents so that they can focus on the actual revenue generation. I think at this point, we want to go ahead and answer some of the questions that are in the chat. So, Adam?
Yeah, thank you. With about 6 minutes left, we'll try to do 2 or 3. I do want to end at the top of the hour just to be respectful of everybody's time. Okay, we have first one here. Question is, would you also touch upon enterprise scale agents reusability? We don't want to constantly reinvent the wheel. It creates its own list of additional concerns for organization. So question about enterprise scale agents reusability.
Yeah, so this is really where it becomes very important to have that program that's got that governance view to it, right? So if we think about, again, how we've done this in the past, right? Let's take API governance as something that is probably near and dear to a lot of people's hearts, right? To prevent APIs to roll, you generally are going to want to have some kind of centralized way by which you can keep track of everything that's been built, right? Oftentimes, we like to recommend that our clients do this through a concept of domain model, right? So that they have a domain architecture that's going to really indicate what are the business capabilities we have, what APIs are surfacing those, and to the extent to which we identify multivariates in them, we try to compress them down into one, right? Rationalization of identifying replication in the enterprise in the brownfield and eliminating things that are replicas of each other. And if we find, as is often the case, we have 8 different APIs that do sort of the same thing, but they're all subtly wrong, you have to combine them together, well, then that's a good example of a place to take something new and then deprecate all the remainder. And so here in Agentics, we have less of a rationalization problem because we typically don't have a brownfield, which means that we have a great opportunity to start at this domain level, identify the domains and the business capabilities within them, and then make sure there's a clear ownership and assignment of those particular teams to ultimately own as products. And as we keep track of that in a centralized way, that is going to give us the ability to govern when these agents are used, and also give us the ability to start building things similar to developer portals that can identify all the agents that are out there and give people an ability to use them. And Google has some great tools around that to be able to enable that functionality as well.
Amazing. Next one here is, how do you recommend identifying the right problems that benefit from agentic AI over traditional automation like LLM-based tools?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that gets back to this concept of agentic ideal versus agentic potential versus non-agentic task. So the key guideline I mentioned is that if you think of the task and you think it's difficult, it's time-consuming, it's boring for a human to do, so humans hate doing it and it's error-prone, but it's quick and easy for them to, and this is important, accurately verify the output, that task is ideal for agentic AI. And the reason why is because we can address the issues that agentic AI has, right, which tend to relate to fabrication, tends to relate to hallucination, unpredictable behavior, unpredictable cost. By having that human who can quickly verify, we can now have the humans manage those agents by exception, or those agents can be used as assistants, right? They can autonomously do work in the background propose solutions to the human could say, yes, that's exactly what I want done, or wait, no, that's not right. Provide that level of oversight. And then we're providing that in the best of both worlds. So that is the ideal task for that. As we start moving away, particularly in that speed and ease of accurate validation, that's when we start looking at more traditional based automation tools, right? Things that are very difficult for a human to verify, or that require as much time for a human to verify as it would have been to do the task in the first place. Research is a traditional example of this. You want to stay far away from agentics and from LLMs as well, because their flaws, right, around hallucination, fabrication, and unpredictability now result in the human having to essentially redo everything that they've done, right? I could take a provocative position about code generation in this regard as well, but that's something I think for a future discussion. But that principle, right? Look for the tasks that are time-consuming, difficult, and boring for a human to perform, but quick and easy for a human to accurately verify the output of. Those are going to be the ones that you want to use agentics for.
Amazing. Thank you. With a minute or so left, we want to give you more information on the next iteration of our webinar series around Agentic AI. It's going to be September 3rd. You all should expect a invite shortly. It's going to be with Andrew on the Google team and Brad on the Concentrix team, just to continue this conversation, talk about execution related to Agentic AI. There's a couple more slides left. I don't know if we want to use that time. I'll defer to Team Concentrix on that one. Do we want to advance?
We're good, Adam.
Brad, I think you're on mute.
We're good, Adam.
Okay, great. So I'll close this out then. Just want to thank everybody for joining today. I know we covered a ton of ground, from biggest challenges in the market to an overview of agentic readiness engagement. Really, this is all designed to help you and your organization build a powerful and intelligent AI ecosystem using tools like Apigee and AgentSpace and application integration. We're going to be following up with each of you directly to provide more information, assets related to the session, help you and your organization get started, and to partner closely with us. Please don't hesitate to reach out with any further questions. I know we got a lot on the chat we didn't get to. We look forward to the next webinar on September 3rd and hope to see you there. So just want to say on behalf of Google Cloud and Concentrix, thanks again for the time. And we're excited to partner with you on this journey to agentic success. So bye for now. Thank you all.